Welcome to the Gothic Theater and happy Easter. My name is Nathan Hoag. I have the privilege of being the parish pastor of the Sacred Grace Inglewood, one of two churches represented here this morning. I love Easter for a lot of reasons, not least of which is the fact that it brings together a pretty diverse crowd of people. There's usually at least two groups present. Those of you who are excited to celebrate something that is near and dear to the core of your faith, and those of you who are here out of obligation to a friend or a family member. I'm not going to make you identify which party you affiliate with. But I will say, to those of you who are part of the former party, out of obligation, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. There is barbecue coming soon. And for those of you who are here because you're here to celebrate something near and dear to the core of your faith, there is in fact barbecue for you as well. But please allow the others to cut in line. They will have earned it. I'll start this morning by letting you in on a little secret. Christians, especially pastors and ministry leaders all over the world today, feel a tremendous amount of pressure. A lot of pressure, anxiety, stress, internal turmoil, even fear. And I know this pressure all too well because for the majority of my life, Easter was a day. One day in 365 to celebrate perhaps the most monumental and world-changing event in human history, the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. And I realize that that's sort of an audacious statement, maybe an unbelievable statement, and there are some people here who are struggling with the validity or the truth of that statement. And for those of you who imagine just for a minute, put yourself in my shoes, somebody who believes that Jesus did in fact rise from the dead wholeheartedly. Put yourself in my shoes and think about all of the implications of that. And the way in which the world, human society as we know it, pivoted on a hinge at that moment. Where either you believe it's true or you can at least imagine if it were true, how that would affect everything. It was a pivotal moment. It affected the fabric of our society, our social fabric, our economic fabric, our religious fabric, even our architectural, literary artwork. Everything changed in that moment. Everything was different from that moment on. It was a hinge moment and a catalyzing moment that propelled things in a different direction. To put it on a more personal level, kind of bring things down to something maybe a little bit more tangible. Think about something in your life that was a hinge moment, something that happened in your life. Maybe it was marriage, maybe it was divorce. Maybe it was being accepted to university or graduating from a university. Perhaps it was the birth of a child or the loss of a child. Perhaps it was buying your first home, or maybe it was being evicted from a home, starting a job, or ending a career. Whatever it was, there have been things in our life that have been hinge moments that have changed the trajectory of our life. And so often we try to relegate these things to either the moment itself or to one day a year following. Right? Like we have anniversaries to celebrate, or we have moments where we grieve the loss of something. But we can't really pack them into one moment or even a series of annual moments because we grieve the loss of someone special every day after they pass or after the relationship breaks. You celebrate and struggle with the existence of your children every day after they're born. You go to work every day after you start a career, and you look for work every day after your job comes to an end. You live in a house every day after you buy it, and you look for affordable housing or at least shelter every day after you're evicted. These things change our daily life, not just our annual life or just relegated to that one particular moment. And so again, back to the resurrection, if we believe that Jesus did in fact rise from the dead and we think about the implications that follow that, they can't be contained to one day. And yet we do this. We try to plaster a big smile on our face, and we sing songs, and we sing the Hallelujah chorus maybe, and we eat too much food, and we maybe depending on what part of the country you're from, you might wear pastels today. That's kind of what we do. We celebrate in this way, right? We do these things, and then we go back to work on Monday as if there's nothing to see here. Just kind of right back to normal life. And so pastors, Christians, ministers, anybody and everybody who adhere to this belief have a tendency to feel a lot of pressure today. To pack that all into one day, this one moment. And I'd like to submit to you that is not only impossible, but an ideology that we should categorically reject. That by no means should our celebration be limited to this place on this day, but rather this should be the beginning of something. Something that rolls out, a tide, if you will, that continues to move on beyond this very moment. I think that's exactly what Jesus called the first witnesses to the resurrection to, as we're going to see in just a moment in Matthew chapter 28. At the end of Matthew's gospel, starting in verse 1 of chapter 28, he says this. After the Sabbath at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on top of it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid that they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He's not here. He's risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay, and then go quickly and tell the disciples, he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you to Galilee, where you will see him. Now I have told you." So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them. "Greetings," he said. And they came to him, they clasped his feet, and they worshipped him. And then he said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." And in all four Gospels, there's some sort of description of this particular story. Jesus is presumed dead. Romans are happy because he was becoming a political nuisance. The Jews, particularly the Jewish leaders, were also pleased with this because he was an embarrassment at best, but in reality, a liability to their belief system. See, Jesus would have been considered to be part of the working poor. He was not the king or the mighty rich warrior that they were looking for. He grew up in a town called Nazareth, which, like Inglewood, was a small working class town. He was not in the sort of position that they wanted him to be in. And there was a third group of people, a small contingent of followers who believed that he may have been, in fact, the Messiah, and they've devoted their lives to him for years. And they were all in hiding, afraid. Afraid because in order for him to have been the Messiah, he needed to be not dead. That was like one of the major requirements. In order for him to be God, he had to be not dead. And now he's dead, and they're all terrified, hiding, holding on to each other, hoping for this all to pass so they could go on to normal life. All of them except for a few women. Two women named Mary and one woman named Salome approach the tomb. They go to the tomb. Why? Why would they go back to this place? Why would they go back to this place that represents, in many ways, failure for them? Why did they go back? Well, there's two reasons. One is probably obvious, to go and pay respects. This is what we do when there's a place that represents a significant event. Maybe it's an alma mater where you graduated. Maybe it's a hospital where one of your children were born. Maybe it's the house you grew up in. Maybe it's the gravestone of a grandparent. These are the places we go to either grieve or celebrate, to remember and to pay respect. But there's another reason. There's another reason why they decide to go to that grave. And I believe it's because they were filled with great courage. These women were extremely courageous. It would have been at least humiliating, if not dangerous, for them to approach this tomb at that time. They had become known at that time as Jesus' followers as rebels, if not even insurrectionists, and there was a problem with them in society. They took a great risk, but they had great courage. On the screen behind me, you'll see a photo of one of my daughters in a moment of great courage. In this photo, she's about 2 years old, and she's about 10 feet off the ground. This, for the record, is not the highest she's ever climbed without aid, but it's the best photo that I have. And I love this photo because she's waving as if this is no big deal. She's like, "Hey, Dad, check me out." And I, like a good father, am standing at a distance documenting the experience because I'm proud. And my wife is quite a bit farther away at our other children's football game on the sideline, screaming at me to spot her as she climbs down. In this moment, my daughter is expressing great courage, which is the ability to see and move beyond the limits of liabilities. The ability to see and move beyond the limits of liabilities, these women do exactly that. They see liability, they see potential fear, maybe even harm to them and themselves, and they move beyond that. And the result is this. They experience great joy. They experience great joy. Joy is like a chemical compound of courage and celebration. It is not aloof or naive to the limits of liabilities. Rather, joy is courageous. It embraces the limits of liabilities, and it celebrates anyways. It embraces fear and anxiety and stress and pain and even death, and it says we will celebrate even in the midst of that. That is what these women held to. These women were joyful and afraid. They were afraid yet filled with joy. Courageous celebration doesn't stick its head in the sand or turn a blind eye to the dangers and pains that brought them there. It's a celebration that embraces fear and brokenness. Nelson Mandela sheds light on this kind of celebration and says, "I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear." The fear and joy that these women experience is the kind of courageous celebration that the resurrection elicits and expects in us. But that's not all they do. They don't just sit there and party and say, this is great. Even in the midst of death, we're going to celebrate. They go and tell. In fact, Jesus quickly tells them to go. They kneel down to clasp at his feet and to worship him and to celebrate the fact, courageously even, that he's still there and that he's alive. And he goes, go. You should go. You should go and tell people. You should go tell people about this hope that's now available to them. A persistent hope. A hope that doesn't have to have limits on it. A hope that's not afraid, but a hope, rather, that shines through the darkness. And I worry every time I start talking about hope or anybody starts talking about hope that we might be lending ourselves to some sort of pop psychology, some sort of optimism that is in ignorance of some of the challenges that we face. I worry that we're just going to put a silver lining on everything and pretend like nothing is really wrong or broken. But it is. The hardest part of practicing the resurrection in my life has been the presence of darkness, brokenness, and suffering. Whether it's the pain that we've experienced in the loss of a pregnancy, the heartache I've experienced when our foster children tell us about their abuse, the difficulties and helplessness that I feel as I raise daughters in a world of sexual exploitation, the rumors of war and war itself and terrorism around the world, knowing of these things alone, the deepness and the darkness and the brokenness of those things makes it hard to celebrate, doesn't it? If we're honest. But the kind of perpetual hope that I see in this story and all the stories between the resurrection and the ascension throughout the Gospels are about light breaking through that darkness. Not pretending like it's not there, but recognizing it, embracing it, and believing in hope and believing in celebration even in the midst of that. Persistent hope of resurrection is something we get to experience all around us. It's not something that's relegated or limited to a day or a moment or an event. It's something we experience every day when we rise from our sleep. It's something we experience every time we buy new shoes or paint a new picture or listen to a new song. Every time we accept help from somebody when we're down for the count or we offer to somebody when they are at their lowest point. Every time we begin something new, we see a leaf or a flower bud on a tree. These are little glimpses and moments of resurrection. And like the women in Jesus' tomb, at Jesus' tomb, we hold heartache in one hand and heaven in the other and experience the honest joy of the resurrection of Christ. Not turning a blind eye to the pain, not turning a blind eye to the brokenness, but allowing the light to shine through the darkness because, as we said during Advent, the darkness has not overcome it. And resurrection makes this clear to us. Easter is more than a day. It is at least a season, if not longer than that. For our church's Eastertide is a 50-day celebration of the resurrection and all the benefits and blessings therein. The redemption of the world by our Lord Jesus Christ, the hope of glory, and God's means of grace in the world. Eastertide is a celebration, courageously, of the persistent hope of the resurrection and the welling and swelling of God's deep mercies for us. It is not something that is relegated to or limited to or kept to a day. It's something that we celebrate for many days. For the next 50 days, we will celebrate courageously this and celebrate that death has lost its sting and the grave has lost its victory. This is the inauguration of celebration, not celebration itself. It starts today. This is the beginning of something. We're beginning this now. This is the movement, the tide going forward, starting in this place, at this moment. The resurrection of Jesus means resurrection for you and me. In these little moments throughout the day, absolutely, where we see light breaking through the darkness, but also overall in a bigger way. It means salvation. It means ultimate redemption beyond death into the future. It's something that those of us who cling to the resurrection get to cling to and celebrate over and over and over again. Shame on us if we keep it to a day. Shame on us if we keep it to this place, only here at the Gothic Theater on April 1st, 2018. May it come out of this place and extend beyond this place into our neighborhoods, into our homes, as we open our doors to everyone and anyone to celebrate raucously and sort of maybe even embarrassingly how great the resurrection is and what it means for us. One of the ways that Christians have been celebrating this accomplishment of Jesus for our entire history is through the communion table. We come to the table regularly to receive bread and wine to celebrate the death, resurrection, and return of Christ. Only a day or so before Jesus was executed, he broke bread into pieces and he passed it around the table. He said, "This is my body, it's broken for you." He poured wine into a glass And he passed that around as well. And he said, this is my blood poured out for you for the forgiveness of sins. And this weekend, our churches officially break our fast from the Eucharist throughout the season of Lent and partake joyfully in the bread and the wine, the body and the blood. We celebrate courageously today, and for the next 50 days, and for 50 days after that, and for 50 more days, for the rest of our lives, that Christ has died, Christ has risen, and Christ will come again. Amen.